You're listening to the Oklahoma Onstage podcast, where we sit down with people from the bustling theater scene in the great state of Oklahoma. We hope you enjoy your time with us. If you do, please share the podcast with those you know. If you'd like to know more about who we are and what we do, visit us on Facebook or Instagram, or go to our website, oklahomaonstage.org. Now, hang on to your hat. We're starting another episode right now.
Welcome back, everybody, to Oklahoma On Stage. We are continuing our series on Oklahoma theater educators. Our guest today is someone very special to the theater community. Professor, director, playwright, board member, judge, volunteer. Our guest today doesn't just wear multiple hats in Oklahoma theater. She's practically running a hat store. For 20 years, she's been the driving force behind the theater arts program at the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma, teaching everything from Shakespeare to screenwriting, directing dozens of productions, and somehow finding time to write her own plays. Oh, and she still finds time to go fishing with her family. Today, we're talking about her journey from Mississippi to Chickasha, what makes USAO's theater program unique, and how she's navigating the challenges of facing higher education in 2026. Plus, what would Oklahoma On Stage be without a little bit of fun along the way? Oklahoma On Stage family, join me in welcoming today Katie Davis to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here and have a chat with you about my favorite stuff.
We're glad to have you here. So, ready to talk about some theater?
Absolutely.
First off, you've been at USAO for 20 years now.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Milestone. But we're going to start from the very beginning.
Oh my gosh.
We're going to go all the way back.
It's a very good place to start.
So where are you from originally?
I was born in Florida, but by the time I was 6 months old, I was living in my grandmother's spare room with my parents, and we were in the process of settling in a really small farming community near the Susquehanna River in central Pennsylvania. So the first 16 years of my life were spent surrounded by coal miners and Amish farmers and Pennsylvania Dutch families who had been there since the early 1700s. And I went to the smallest high school with the largest land area of any of the school districts in Oklahoma at the time. So that's where I'm from.
Okay. So what was your, this question is, what was your first experience with theater? But I love the question, how did the bug bite you?
Before I remember it, I think. And I say that because of stories that were told to me by my mother. My parents had moved to Pennsylvania to take care of my grandmother who was ailing. And we moved in with her first, and then she moved in with them when they bought a house. And so my earliest memories are of sitting in a kitchen, looking across the street at a coal yard, which is what my neighbor did. He ran a colliery. And my mother would be standing at the stove or doing something in the kitchen, and my grandmother would be settled comfortably in one of the kitchen chairs. And the way she preoccupied me is she read to me. And she told me stories, and we acted out the plays. And so I would be Little Red Riding Hood, and she would be the grandma, and my mother would be the wolf, and I would be Mickey from the story, right? And my grandmother was born in 1904, and she grew up fascinated with the stars of the Romantic era theater. So she called me Sarah Bernhardt long before I had any idea who Sarah Bernhardt was. But by the time I started school, I wanted to be in a play. And there weren't 3 years of my life since then where I haven't been in a play.
Wow. So was there ever or what was the moment? I know there always was. What was the moment when you said to yourself, "This is what I've got to do"?
I had no idea that was what I could do. So when I was in a play, what it meant was the high school was doing a production of Peter Pan, and all the kids in the elementary school were allowed to be the animals in the animal chorus. And my family couldn't afford to make me a costume, but one of the other parents gave me the second rabbit costume that didn't fit their daughter. So I was the rabbit with the black paws and the black ears. And the only thing I remember about the production was the song we sang. But I love to tell people I did Peter Pan and I got hooked. By the time I was in high school, we did not have any theater classes at our high school. Once a year, we would have a musical production staged by our choir director who had once done a theater production in college. And there was a lady from Shamokin, Pennsylvania, little small coal mining town. Her claim to fame was that she was a baton-twirling teacher, and in her youth had been on the Johnny Carson show and twirled baton.
Okay.
Betty Capizello would come to our high school and stage all of the musicals. Sharon Jones would direct all of the musicals, and most of us had no idea what was going on in the rest of the play at all, except for whatever scene we showed up on. But we showed up as an after-school social activity. I didn't know you could major in theater. So I left for college loving going to play practice, loving creative problem solving. I was involved with the Odyssey of the Mind. They called it Olympics of the Mind back then. Loved problem solving. Went to college as a pre-med major. Picked the college I went to because their placement into medical school was so high. I didn't really understand what the difference was between going to a public school and a private school. I didn't really understand the difference of what it might be to be in a liberal arts college as opposed to one of the other universities in Pennsylvania. I knew nothing about higher ed, and I didn't know you could do theater as a job. But because when I arrived on campus as a freshman, I wanted my peer group and I wanted my social activity, I went to auditions. And I was cast in a small role in the fall production. And in the course of that fall, I found out you could major in theater. I found out that there were theater classes I never dreamed about, and you could study things that connected to everything else I was interested in, from writing to I loved to read. I loved stories of all kinds. I was fascinated by engineering and medicine and technology and law and psychology, and there seemed to be a theater class for that. And at the end of my freshman first semester, I was an honor roll student, and I stopped being pre-med and I changed my major to theater. And there are currently looking down on us many, many of my family members who probably are still brokenhearted that I did not go on and become a doctor. But yeah, that it was that semester when I found out that you could really go on as a professional. And I still had never met anybody who worked professionally in theater other than the person at my college who was teaching theater. But she promised me that there really were jobs. They probably just weren't in Dornsife, Pennsylvania.
Okay. So all of your college, this experience, this all was in Pennsylvania.
I went to Juniata College. Juniata College is just over the mountain from Penn State. But Juniata is a small private liberal arts school founded by the Church of the Brethren. I was lucky because my family was poor and my grades were good. And so I got a 4-year scholarship, or I would have never set my pinky toe on that campus. I may not have gotten to Penn State, but I did not realize what an exceptional education, what a life-changing experience. It would be decades later before I put all the pieces together to realize how incredibly lucky I was to be a kid who got that education. And everything from there on has been a path of how do you make this theater degree do what you know it can do.
So you got a theater degree. How did you end up from Pennsylvania to Mississippi?
By way of Texas and New York and Philadelphia and several places in between.
Okay.
Because what I did with a bachelor's degree in theater was I figured out very quickly that what I had had the chance to learn in 4 years was barely scratching the first percent of what there really was to know and do with theater. By the time I was a junior, I got the bug of, I went back home the summer I was a junior and reached out to some community theaters, which I didn't even know about when I was a kid in high school, and started seeing what community theaters were doing in the Anthracite Coal region. The first community theater I ever touched base with was a group called the Anthracite Players. They're still in operation in central Pennsylvania. They gave me the first opportunity to direct a one-act play. And to my enormous humiliation, my cast quit before opening night and we never performed.
Oh, no.
And it was this sudden discovery that there was something completely different between understanding everything and having this theoretical understanding of theater and being able to connect to what a specific community wanted and needed. And it changed my whole way of approaching my senior year in college because I realized most people don't want a theater class. They want theater to work in their hometown, in their church, in their community theater, in their high school, the way their community needs theater. And every time you walk into a new theater in a new place, you better figure out what that is first, because your agenda is not the one that's going to be successful. So the next summer, when I came home, I just graduated, honors graduate. I was already offered a scholarship and a fellowship and an assistantship to go to the University of Texas in El Paso. And what I did that summer was I worked for a little community theater, aspiring to being bigger and better than a community theater. There was a guy named Jesse Klein, and he and his husband Patrick had for years run theaters, and he had an arrangement with the Grand Candlelight Theater in a little town called Milton, Pennsylvania. And they were doing, under the guise of Rockwell Productions, they were going to do a New York Equity Cast production of West Side Story. And I had a college degree, and I showed up one day, and for what they were willing to give me in a stipend, I agreed to be their costume designer and wardrobe manager. And I spent that summer, some of it actually living in the costume shop, connected with their playhouse in Milton, and meeting this entire cast that came in from New York, staged this show, traveling to Philadelphia to go to the studios where we recorded the commercials for the show. It was my first touch of, okay, these are people who have done professional theater other places, and here are all of these 18, 19, 20-year-olds from New York coming in 3-week rehearsals and then 3 weeks of performance to do this show, and a totally different window on the world. By the time I got on the train at the end of the summer, I'd had enough money to buy my train ticket, to pack a couple of bags with stuff that I thought I would need living out in the desert, and I had $75 in my pocket. And I got on a 4-day train ride to El Paso, Texas, to be met, presumably at the train station, by a graduate advisor who I'd never met, in a city I knew nobody, 1,300 miles away from home. And I didn't go home for 2 years. The 3 years in El Paso, I might as well have come back a different human being.
Wow. So El Paso, is that where you went from El Paso to Mississippi?
No.
Okay. Now you went to New York, right?
Well, El Paso, I did my master's work at El Paso.
Okay.
And I arrived there at the same time as some incredible teachers. One of my instructors had just gotten out of grad school at UC San Diego, and he was trained in Anne Bogart and Chicano theater and theater for social change, and he was amazing. And he ran a company at the college called El Elenco Experimental, and that was totally a different kind of theater than I had ever seen. External acting methods, companies devising pieces, companies working specifically with philosophies about how to give theater back to communities. The same time, there was a professor who had just finished her degree at BYU, And she had trained with Sanford Meisner, and she was a very internal, psychologically motivated realism. And she was the one who taught my theater scholarship classes and some of my research methods classes. And she directed the Chekhov productions, right? And then the guy who was running the playwriting program, who now lives in Oklahoma, he's 80 years old now, and he is still one of the most amazing mentors on the planet. Michael Wright was both an acting, directing, and playwriting teacher for undergraduates and graduates at UTEP. Michael taught my playwriting classes. He was my thesis advisor. He taught my directing classes, and Michael's connection was back to Actors Studio in New York. He was a playwright. While I was there, I not only helped him develop and run his new play festivals, Playworks, Winterworks, Summerworks. I became his student producers for the festival. I became his research assistant for the books that he started writing then. He has since then written a set of playwriting books, one of which I use as one of the texts in my class even to today. He has been for many years, both nationally and internationally, one of those guys who what he says about plays really matters. And he was the one who challenged me to really think about the relationship between new plays and playwriting. El Paso was the first place I took film classes, and I stayed extra years in that program, not only to be able to take the film classes in film school there and begin to get a vocabulary and an understanding of the relationship between theater and film and playwriting and screenwriting, but there was also a guy named Cesar Alejandro who had just moved his film studio from Ciudad Juarez to El Paso and was making movies all the time. And so a bunch of us would just go out and help him make films. We would cross the border into Frontera, Chihuahua, and we would make movies all day long, and then we'd come back and we'd do a show at the Southwest Rep, and then we'd go to our next rehearsal. So at one point in time, I was in rehearsals for 8 different shows or films at the same time.
Oh, goodness.
It was nonstop. I worked for a company called Theater Inc., whose mission was to deliver educational theater to the poorest school districts of El Paso. So I was paid 2 days a week to go and perform as Annie Sullivan in The Miracle Worker. I was beginning the foundation of a women's theater collective that had sort of stopped and started for a while. There was a woman named Catherine McWilliams, who was a grad student, who had wanted there to be more roles for women at UTEP. And we ended up reshaping that women's collective into a company that we called WTEP, the Women's Theater Ensemble Project. And we started doing new plays written by local playwrights and by women, and entered the College Theater Festival with them and got awards and stuff from ACTF. So yeah, I had my hands in everything there. And from there, 3 big pieces happened. One, I spent a summer interning in New York and working at some professional theaters there. I made some connections through the graduates there to some different places that I toured. And I don't put any of the stuff I've never been paid for on my CV. My CV is the stuff I've been paid for. But I bopped around to a bunch of different places just performing. And then I got a phone call about 3 months before I was supposed to be finished with my thesis, which I just kept putting off because there was always one more project to do, one more class to take, one more book to help write. And the phone call was from the head of the English Communication and Theater Arts program at Juniata College, Dr. Donna Weimer. May she rest in peace. We just lost her. And she said, "Katie, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm fooling around out here in the desert, making a bunch of movies and writing a bunch of plays and having a good time." And she said, "What are you doing next?" And I said, "I don't know. I just went to New York and I may go back to North Carolina." And she said, "How about you come back to Juniata?" Right after I left Juniata College, they had dissolved their theater arts program and reimagined it as part of their English communications program. They were back to the point where they had a bunch of students that wanted a theater major and they had no curriculum. And so they hired me to come in for a year at Juniata and develop a curriculum and make proposals for a program and create a theater ensemble there and recruit some students and to help them hire the person who was going to run the program, because I didn't have a terminal degree, right? I was just a kid with a master's degree, and ideas.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing year there. And of the students who were my students, so this is 1996, so 30 years ago. And I walked into the first college classroom where I was the full-time professor. And I'd done a bunch of student teaching at UTEP and everything from world literature classes to acting classes to, I mean, I was part of what I was paid for that kept me at school there was that I was teaching for them too. But that fall at Juniata, I directed Antigone. I took all these ideas that I didn't know anything about at all when I had been a student there and brought them back to this campus. I was 23 years old, and my seniors were 23 years old. And we had this wild, wonderful year. The spring we did Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. We reimagined what a theater program would be. We wrote a prospectus for how they would renovate the theater. We wrote a notice of vacancy for who the ideal person would be to come in and what a theater program that did more than it had ever done for me there would look like now. A handful of those people continue to be my best friends. They are PhDs in theater who are working different places. They are MFAs in theater who are working different places. They're everywhere up and down the East Coast from Savannah up to upstate New York. And there's about 12 of them who I connect with at least monthly to see where they are and how old their kids are. The most recent conversation I had was with that year, there was a freshman who was a computer science major and did everything with productions. He was our sound guy, and he was our light guy, and he was our problem-solving guy. And he now is running for state office as senator in Pennsylvania and reached out to announce that. And I offered him, well, if you need your old theater teachers' endorsement to talk about what kind of human you are and why you are still there doing the stuff you're doing. But he has stayed in the county where he went to college and is doing that. So yeah, which does not yet get me to Mississippi, right?
Yeah, you've got a lot going on and still have yet to get where we're going.
Right. And I started young,
Right.
as you notice, so 1 year at Juniata, and then I'm kind of out in the world because we had a quick conversation at the end of that year with the provost of the college. And he said, well, what if we just declare your degree and your experience terminal and let you stay and get this program started? And I was like, yeah, that's great. And then the people started coming in to interview for the job. And I said, no. I said, I'm not. I love this program. I am connected to these students. I love this campus. I love my faculty mentors. In fact, right now, again, thank goodness for Facebook because I'm still in touch with some of the faculty who were the people who changed my life. But I said, yeah, no, we just interviewed this guy and he's the one you need to hire. He's incredible. He knows stuff I don't know. He should be here. So I moved to Philadelphia because I had a friend who had an apartment there and they had a room about the size of a shoebox that I could live in for free while I figured out what I was doing. And I started hustling to see what you could do in theater in Philadelphia. And I connected to tons of people doing great community theater up and down the Western Main Line, everywhere from the Hedgerow Theater to the Barnstormers. Through them, I made friends with the ones who, hey, I show up sometimes at this professional theater and I do this. I got a job working at Blockbuster so I could bring in enough money to pay my gas money. And one night I'm standing at Blockbuster, and this brilliant African-American woman comes up to the counter, and she starts asking me questions about films that I've been dying to answer since I left grad school, and nobody talks to me about film anymore. And her name was Kathy Simpson. She still lives and works in the same area, but we spent way too long talking about movies, and she said, you come to see me tomorrow. I'm part of the resident company at the People's Light and Theater Company, which I didn't know about. People's Light and Theater Company was founded as an ensemble project by a bunch of amazing hippie kids in the 60s. They started in a barn renting out lighting instruments. That's why they were the People's Light Company, right? Like if you needed lighting instruments to put on a show. And Danny Fruchter and Abigail Adams and a handful of these people had turned a barn in what turned out to be one of the wealthiest places in Western Philadelphia, into a residential theater that had a huge main stage that was the barn renovated into a huge playhouse. They had opened a second stage for their children's and family series. On the property, they had renovated the farmhouse to be the housing for the resident company that they hired in to be the ensemble that ran the theater. And they had about 70 people on staff doing everything from education director to grant writer to literary manager. It was a $10 million a year high-level operating professional theater. And I got a job there. And I got a job first in their business office. They liked that I had a master's degree. They didn't have an immediate opening in their artistic company, but they liked that I understood everything their company was doing. So for a couple of years, I did everything for them, from group sales management to telemarketing management. I interned and learned from Nancy Shaw, who was their education director. She taught me everything I learned about grant writing. I worked with David Bradley, who was developing the Children's Outreach Company, and taught me everything I learned at the beginning about how you do community outreach. And after a couple of years there, I was sitting in the lobby. We were working on a play called Sally's Gone, She's Left Her Name. Brand new play. And it hit my heart because, right, I've already got this love for new play development. And David Strathairn had come in and was playing one of the leads in the show. He had just finished doing... what movie had he just finished? Something that was after River Wild, because the first conversation I had with him, he told me I was now 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon, because he had made River Wild with Kevin Bacon, and now I was working on this show. And I was assisting the assistant director. The director was a guy named Ken Marini, who was one of the original founding members of this theater. But we're working on that production, and we were all hanging out one night after rehearsal, and after the actors had gone home, Ken Marini was asking me, he said, "Why in the world are you helping to run the box office and doing assistant house managing and selling tickets? And why are you doing all this different stuff here?" He said, "I'm sitting in rehearsal with you. You should be directing this show." And I said, "Yeah, but I've got a master's degree and I don't know where I'm going." And he said, "Go back to school." He said, "Go back to school and get a couple of more letters after your name that will open the door to some of the things you're supposed to be doing." And I said, "Ken, this is a terrible time for me to go back to school. My sisters just started college. My parents are getting a divorce. They're selling the house I grew up in. I don't have any money. I've just kind of gotten in here, and I love this company and what they're doing." And he said, "Go back to school." So I applied. I applied everywhere from Yale to San Francisco to the University of Mississippi. And the first school that called me up and said, "We will give you a free ride. We've got a fellowship. We've got a scholarship. We like your transcript. We like what you've been doing. We like what you wrote in your application," was Ole Miss. I got an interview at Yale, and David Chambers at Yale told me, "You're way too young." He said, this program is for people who are much further along in their career than you are. And he said, "But thanks for coming up." And I said, "Well, that's nice. Thanks for having me." So on my 26th birthday, I got a rejection letter from Yale. The guy pulled into my parents' driveway to deliver my father the final paperwork about the divorce. And I decided I was going to Mississippi.
All that, and you're only 26 years old.
Theater people hustle.
Okay. Wow.
So yeah, that's how I got to Mississippi.
Okay. So, kind of hard to figure out where to go from there. So, while in Mississippi, you were part of creating Corinth Theater Arts.
Oh, I wasn't part of creating it,
Okay.
but I certainly was responsible for its care and love for a while. It's yet another one of those, I was doing this thing, but then this opportunity came up. It's actually entirely the fault of the faculty at the University of Mississippi, because I was in a 3-year MFA program. I was doing very well. I was taking theater classes and film classes, and really this time focusing specifically on directing film, editing film, and directing for the theater, but interested in directing for the theater in alternative styles. And I did a production of Heinrich Ibsen's Rosmersholm for the student theater. On the day that the planes hit the towers in New York, I was teaching an acting class that morning, and I walked into the first rehearsal of Godspell with Renee Pulliam directing that night. And I remember every conversation I had on that campus that whole day. And my proposal was that I wanted to do Shakespeare as a thesis production. And I was told by every faculty member in the department and by the undergraduate acting teachers and by my thesis committee, that's in over the head of where the people in this program are right now, right? We want this to be a studio theater production. We went round and round about it. And I said, you've been training me for 3 years in all of these alternative styles, everything from Beckett and Brecht to Shakespeare. And they said, yeah, but it really doesn't match up with where our season is. And so my second proposal was to do a production of Buried Child. I ended up doing my MFA thesis on Sam Shepard. I ended up doing a really well-supported studio production of Buried Child that employed a lot of the stuff that I had learned from Raoul and Elilenko in the way we reimagined its staging. And then that show was done in the fall. I'm writing my thesis. I'm wrapping up all my hours there. And over Christmas, there was a flyer hanging up on a bulletin board in the theater that said, "Emergency director needed. Corinth Theater Arts is presenting Much Ado About Nothing and needs a director." And they had reached out to Northeast Mississippi Community College and Northwest Mississippi Community College, and Corinth was about an hour and a half to an hour 45-minute commute from Oxford. And I thought, why not? I'd just broken up with the guy I was living with. I was thinking about where, like, it's great in your life when you're at a point of stuff changing.
Yeah.
And I said, what in the world would keep me from driving up to Corinth 4 nights a week in the spring? My thesis is almost written. I'm not taking any classes that I'm scared of. My main production that I was doing for the year was over. So I drove up and I interviewed with their board of directors. And the town of Corinth, Mississippi sits in the far northeast corner of the state. There used to be an opera house there, way back. There used to be much more connection to the performing arts, but Alcorn County schools at that time did not have great theater programs. Corinth High School did a musical every year. Alcorn County High School did a musical every now and then when they could afford one and find one. Littler communities around there, kids from Boonville would come up. I quickly figured out, in spite of itself, this little theater operating in Corinth, Mississippi, was the cultural hub for everybody in the Tennessee area around Selmer, Tennessee, all the way down to almost to Oxford. If you were in Blue Mountain College, if you were going to high school in any of the little outlying areas, most of your schools didn't have a theater class, right? It did the thing a community theater was supposed to do. It was founded in the 60s. Again, it was a little place that was the vision of a group of theater artists who thought, our town needs a theater, our kids need opportunities to take camps and classes. It was not founded with the vision of a nonprofit organization. It was founded as a little theater. Here's a group of friends to get together to do the stuff we wanted to do. And one of the women who had been one of the founders was still sitting on the board of directors. But over the course of about 35 years, it had become a nonprofit, and it was trying to figure out what do nonprofit theaters do that little theaters don't. They'd started to get connected to the Mississippi Arts Council and to thinking about grants, and they'd gotten connected with the Mississippi Theater Association. And they had gone through recent changes where the economy of the 90s was a huge thing for Corinth. They had a couple of huge factories open, one of which was connected with JPL rockets. I may be at the wrong company there, but a whole bunch of rocket scientists and their families and their smart kids moved to Alcorn County. And for a couple of years, they had dozens more people showing up, wanting to do A Few Good Men, wanting to do 1776 the musical. And I say those things because if you're in a little community theater, you know, we can't do 1776. You need 20 men who can sing, right? And then everything had closed down after NAFTA, and we were back in a place where, and so they had a full-time artistic director who they were paying to run the theater, and he'd gotten a better job in Florida. And they'd had some people who were volunteers, and, well, the upshot of all of it is I went in and directed Shakespeare for them. And by the end of the spring, I was planning a summer camp for them. And by the end of the summer, I had directed a couple of kids' shows and a musical, and I'd been hired to be both their full-time artistic director and business manager. And I stayed there for a bunch of years and did a lot of shows, did like 60 shows, everything from outreach to we renovated the theater. We did a huge capital fundraising campaign where we could get rid of a whole bunch of the problems the theater had. We grew our volunteer base. We started a community project where we had a grant where we could take shows out and tour them around to schools. We got a grant where we could bring schools in and we filled Corinth Coliseum with hundreds of kids from high schools all over Mississippi to see a production of To Kill a Mockingbird, which none of them were allowed to teach in their schools, and they weren't reading it in their schools. And we filled the Coliseum, and before the show, I had the gentleman who was playing Reverend Sykes step out and have a conversation with the kids in the audience, that when he first came into that theater, he had to use a doorway in the alleyway at the back, and he had to sit in the balcony because that was the colored section of that theater, and that he was pleased and proud to be putting on this show at this theater for all of them who were there that day. He was an accountant in the community. The man who played Atticus Finch in that production was our assistant district attorney in Alcorn County, and the girl who played Scout was his daughter. We did some really risky, wonderful, amazing stuff. It was better than anything I'd done in New York, and better than anything I'd done in Philadelphia, and better than anything I'd done working on big Hollywood films out in the desert of El Paso. It changed what I wanted the rest of the trajectory of my theater life to be, because I would go through the drive-thru at the Dairy Queen, and the guy who worked at the Dairy Queen would tell me what his kids thought about the show they'd gotten to see, and how their family was excited for what the theater was going to do next, and how were they going to get involved.
That's community.
It was everything that I had ever wanted when I wanted to be a doctor, when I wanted to be a novelist, when I wanted to be a creative problem solver. It was everything I had ever wanted when I was thinking about why we write books about playwriting. It was, this is where theater meets life and does all of the stuff that people need for theater to do. And then I fell in love, and I wanted to have a family, and my husband lived 3 hours from Corinth, and I didn't want to move to where he was, and he didn't want to move to Corinth. And we decided we would do a nationwide job search, and wherever the two of us got hired, no matter where it was, we'd go there for 1 year. We would go there for 1 year, we would get married, and we would figure out where we wanted to live and what we wanted to do. And I got hired. I was offered a job at one of the colleges in Mississippi. I was offered a job for a private performing arts high school in Virginia. I was waiting on an offer from a job in Maryland that I thought probably was the place I wanted to go. And I got invited to drive out to Chickasha, Oklahoma, to interview at the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma. And I had the weirdest telephone interview with the University of Science and Arts that I had ever had. One of the first questions that I was asked in that interview, there was an art professor named Kent Lamar, and we're talking about my transcript, and we're talking about what kind of classes I could teach. We're talking about my liberal arts background, and Kent Lamar asked me how much I liked naked things. And I loved it. And I said, do you mean you naked or me naked? um, so I drove out to Chickasha, and I interviewed here, and I talked to the vice president, and I stood on the steps of Trout Hall and talked to my friend J.C. Casey, who is professor of communication, for 3 hours. And we talked about everything from the Deep South, because she was from Louisiana, to golden retrievers, because we both owned them and loved them, to what football team we were going to cheer for and what plays we liked to put on, because she had done theater in grad school. And by the time I got in the car that night, I was driving all the way back to Corinth, because I had a rehearsal the next day. I talked to my future husband on the phone the whole way, and I said, I had no idea that there was such a thing as a public liberal arts college. But what this little campus does is tries to make the experience that I lucked into at Juniata College, and that I lucked into again when I taught at Juniata College, accessible to any kid in any family of any income level, of any background. I have to go there. And he said, well, where am I going to get a job? And I said, I don't know. And he looked on Corinth, Mississippi's, not Corinth, Mississippi, at Chickasha, Oklahoma's job site, and the Express Star was hiring a graphic designer. And he applied, and he got hired. And that was our deal. I was offered the job at USAO. He was offered a job making much less money than he was making working at the Tuscaloosa News. But we both had a job, so we were coming to Chickasha for a year.
So you came for a year.
20 years ago.
And obviously it hooked.
Life. Life again. Life will surprise you. Life will change stuff. What you fall in love with, where you are, who you fall in love with, who you lose. The thing that suddenly has meaning that you never thought was going to be the most important thing that had meaning in your life. The things that pulled you some other direction stop pulling you that direction when there's something that needs you right there and now.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, was arriving here and seeing what could be at this little college campus, in this little community. It kind of combined a ton of the stuff that I had found that I knew I loved. And I say this to students all the time about this campus, but during that first year here, I figured out we are small enough that everybody here knows who you are. You see too much of your professors, you see too much of the other students in class. There's only about 50 faculty members on campus. We know too much about each other. We spend too many of the same times. Right? It's small. Everybody knows who you are. We're also small enough you know who you are.
Mm.
As a student, as a teacher, as a professional staff member, every day is a reconnection to who am I and why am I here? Yeah. Well, I took you into the little theater just a little while ago, and I told you you can tell when you're in a place where the right things are going to happen.
Yeah, you can feel it. I mean, even if you don't come and see what's going on in the classes or what's going on after school or whatever, you just walk in there and you can feel it.
This is a special school. One of the things I love the best about this school, and I posted about it yesterday, and you liked my post, so I'm going to talk about it. A lot of my students who come to study here, who come to the theater program, who end up in my classes, if you did the statistics about them on paper, they shouldn't be in college, and they should never be on track to getting the college degree.
Yeah.
They come from backgrounds where they didn't have enough academic support, they didn't have enough academic preparation. They come from families without the right support network, without the financial resources. I've had students over the years have everything from losing both parents in a horrific car accident when they weren't yet a sophomore in college, to students where they're raising a child entirely on their own and trying to figure out how they're going to, right? The statistics of who should be able to finish a degree. I've had students flunk out and come back and flunk out again, right? And they get degrees. And they not only get degrees, they go on and they follow that thing where they've gone from here and then they go to grad school surprisingly, amazingly, and they get a degree in library science, and then they come back and they run the youth library program in our library, and then they get hired as head librarian somewhere else, and now one of them is running Oklahoma libraries for the state. Right?
Wow.
What do you do with a theater degree? You
Anything.
change the state that you live in, you change the town that you live in, you change the economy that you live in, you change the lives of the people around you. Yeah, that my students are not just on stage somewhere. They're
Theater students are exactly that. They're change agents. I mean, and to think that the world we live in is trying to change that, Lord knows what the future is going to look like. So
theater has survived worse.
Oh, sure. It's been one of the, and I think I heard something to the effect that, quote, theater is the one thing that's been trying to be killed for hundreds of years and has sustained.
Rises right back up out of the ashes every single time because it's so important. Not the theater that people think is theater. Not let's go sit downtown at night and watch some play from the 1940s. But the theater that really is about where do you learn communication skills and project management skills, and where do you learn to collaborate with people, and where do you learn other people's stories and how to empathize with people, and where do you get your ideas for public policy, and where do you get your ideas about how we're going to help the kids who are at the hospital, or how we're going to help the people who are down at the courthouse, or how we're going to help the kids who are in the schools, or how are we going to teach about bullying, or how is our community going to get ideas out there about this. The answer comes back over and over and over again because of the skills we learn in theater.
So true. That's so true. So you've been coordinating this program here at USAO for 20 years. We talked about that already. What would you say is one of your most proud accomplishments?
Every single time I stand in the lobby after a play and the audience is talking to the student actors and technicians about the incredible play they did, about what it meant to them, or about the work that they could see, every time I can stand in a corner of the lobby and have absolutely nobody at all even notice that I'm there because they are so busy recognizing the amazing things that the students here have done.
Oh, that's good.
It's my favorite part of opening night, of closing night, and sometimes that's all we get is an opening and a closing night. But yeah, it's handing over an understanding to the students of what they're capable of doing and the skills they have. But when their families and their friends and their peers come in and see, oh, so this is what you're learning to do, and it meant something to me, or wow, I could see those costumes that you were, or those lights were really cool, or I had no idea that theater could be like that, or I didn't know that that's what Shakespeare was, or look how cool you were dancing, or what, right? Sometimes it's an artistic discovery. Sometimes it's just a family who didn't think they liked theater, realizing that they had a really positive experience. Sometimes it's somebody who walks out with an idea where the thing that the show was about is now something they're going to talk about with their kid who's in college. And I had a dad. He's one of my favorite people. He's from Lawton. His daughter came to school here. She was here for 4 years. She was involved in every production for 4 years, which happened to be 9 shows in the time she was here. And so, bless his heart, he came up to every single one of her shows, sometimes saw 2 or more productions of it in the weekend. He loved his daughter, so he was going to come to the plays. And when she graduated, he came to me one day and he said, Katie, what am I going to do without theater? He said, I started as a guy who didn't like it and didn't know what it was. And you have shown me Sanskrit theater, and you have shown me Shakespeare, and you have shown me stuff I had no idea what it was when I was going in. And he said, I have been jealous every single time you get in front of the audience and thank us for coming and talk about the theater family. He said, I want to be part of that theater family. What do I do? And at the time, I was on the board of directors for a theater in Oklahoma City, and I said, "We've got a spot." And what this man had done was he had worked in fundraising for a nonprofit for many years. And I said, "There's a theater that has a board of directors, and they need somebody who knows about fundraising. How about you jump in a bigger circle?" And he did. Yeah, I like that people don't realize that when a kid goes to college, your whole family goes to college.
Absolutely.
And your friends in your hometown get a connection to college. And all of you get a window on something different. And that connection travels. And I still have this student's dad on my Facebook page. And his community engagement, now that he is retired, and his sense of what the arts do for communities blows my mind. He's incredible.
Very cool. And I love the connections to that. I mean, it's just, and it's ripples. You never know. I talk about it a lot in a lot of different ways, but so many things that we do, it's like throwing that pebble in the pond. You don't always know where those ripples are going to go until they come back. And that's the cool part. So, and I love this question, and I really wanted to make sure I had time for this one. You teach more than 40 different courses, from theater history to film. So my question is, over 20 years teaching all these different courses, how do you keep all of that fresh and engaging?
I go to work every day. I don't go to play every day. I don't go to sit on my butt and rest on what I did 20 years ago every day. And maybe that's the thing that makes me so frustrated with the suspicion about higher education right now. You can't teach 40 classes if you don't go back to school yourself all the time. If I'm not constantly involved in research, if I'm not constantly reaching out to other professionals, going to workshops, going to conferences, staying current with journals, that if I haven't taught a class in 4 years, even if it's a class I've taught 5 times before, I go back to school to teach that class, to be accountable that, am I taking the most current information into my classroom? Am I making sure that my students are connected to the most contemporary ways of accessing what I'm talking about? And so, yeah, it isn't that you keep it all organized, is that you just go to work for it every day. And I didn't start off to say, okay, these are the 40 classes I'm going to teach. There's a core of what I teach all the time, that I think about all the time. But we're the kind of little program where we can pivot and accommodate different things that student needs. So as students discovered that intimacy direction was something that they wanted to know more about, and they ask for, let's do a deep dive into understanding how intimacy is handled in American film, I start doing the research and I develop the course and we teach the course. Sometimes I have a student who wants to go to grad school for dramaturgy and there wasn't a dramaturgy class on the books. So I spend 4 or 5 months developing the class and figuring out, what are they getting out of the best dramaturgy classes at other places? What are the standard textbooks? What are the things I need to do to learn to teach this? And because I came to higher ed as somebody who had been working in the field, I feel like a phony anytime I walk in a classroom and just talk to somebody about something I've never done. So part of my challenge has been, where do I go take the workshop? Who do I go and learn it from? Where do I go and practice it at a level where not only can I tell them that this theoretically is the way it's being done in the world, but I can connect them to the people who are doing it. And so I've been grateful for all of the people who have continued to be my teachers and my advisors and my mentors. I think I told you that Michael Wright now lives in Tulsa. He ended up on his own path that brought him to Oklahoma, and he ended up teaching creative writing at the University of Tulsa. He's now retired, and he writes books of poetry, and he writes novels. And for the first time since I was in grad school, I got to go and see him read from one of his books at a play reading in Oklahoma City about 1.5 years ago. But I reach out to Michael still, 30 years after I took his classes. I was presenting for the Association of Theater and Higher Education conference last year. I had been called and invited to be on a panel about playwriting. Most of the people on the panel were early career academics, but I am one of the few people they knew who had been teaching theater in a liberal arts setting for as long as I've been teaching theater with playwriting as a component. And the day before I go in to be on the playwriting panel, I reached out to Michael, and I'm like, okay, Michael, do I know anything of what I'm talking about anymore? Let's talk about playwriting again and see what I can learn from you all over again. Is this what you meant in your book? Is this what we discovered when we talked about this? What about this new guy's book that's out there? Yeah, and Michael will send me a text back in his very New York Michael Wright way and be like, well, hell yeah, that's what this is.
So, along that same vein, we talked briefly at the beginning of the introduction that you are also a playwright yourself. What does, along with the teaching aspect, what does playwriting, why is that so significant to you?
So that I know what the heck I'm talking about when I walk into a playwriting class. It again is something where if the only contact I have with it is theory, being able to sit in a room with other young writers who are in the vulnerable position of bringing in new writing and workshopping it, I try to be working on something I'm writing every time I'm teaching a playwriting class so that I'm right there with them going through the challenging process of having to make things active, having to think about characters, having to sit through, for me, rehearsals with actors, workshopping texts that I've been working on. But it's really hard for me to ask a student to do something that I have not done in a circumstance where I had someone critique me. In fact, one of the exceptions to that, I have not been performing since I've been in Oklahoma. Part of it is because I am with show all of the time as a director. Part of it is because what I did get to do after moving here was I did get married, and I do have a 17-year-old son, and I've been a mom who likes to go to baseball games and go fishing with her kid. And I no longer am the person who does 13 shows at a time. I do 13 things at a time.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to be in the position of here's somebody who's been studying this for 35 years. It's a really careful power line to cross, to walk into a place and not be in competition with the people. And I don't like competitive theater. I wouldn't get on stage with my students here because it's not fair for me to have 40 years of experience and expect them. I don't want it to be that they look at me and go, okay, I can't keep up with that. Or I don't want there to be any line crossed there. So I don't perform in competition with my students. I try to bring other people in to do that. Like we brought the Push Physical Theater in to do a month-long residency here so that they were on stage with other adults, and they were far in their career different. But that's different than the person you have to be able to go to their office and tell them when you're failing a subject, right? That there has to be a line of professional confidence and vulnerability, and I don't compete with my kids. And that's why I like the playwriting part, because playwriting is all vulnerability. I'm never walking in saying, now look at this great scene that I wrote and look at, right? It's always vulnerable. They get to watch me walk in rehearsal and see stuff not work all the time. But yeah, I think it's just accountability. It's making sure that you walk the walk all the time of what you're going to teach in the classroom.
Well, like you said just a minute ago, you don't do 13 shows, but you're doing 13 things. You're a professor, a coordinator, a producing director, a playwright, judge for multiple organizations. You're a board member. How do you do it all?
It's like a rehearsal schedule. One scoop at a time, one project at a time, right? It's you come to campus more often, you stay at campus a little longer. You give up some of your weekends to, well, you were at Oklahoma Thespians with me last weekend, right? You drive up to Sand Springs to spend a day, and I'm wearing my coordinator hat, and I'm volunteering, and I'm teaching, and I'm giving feedback to kids who are doing monologues, and I'm also recruiting, right? And then you change hats, and the next day you are showing up to help CW think about what you guys are doing at Carpenter Square Theater and mentoring a former student. CW was my student my very first year here. He was one of the first kids in that program, and the fact that I still get to come back and talk to him about the shows he's doing, the rehearsals he's walking into, we get to debrief together as directors about problems we're solving.
It's good to be on a different level with a former student than you were as a student teacher.
And that's what facilitates so many of these activities is this is what I'd be doing if nobody paid me for it. Like I figured out years ago, if I suddenly became independently wealthy, I would want to spend a certain amount of time on a boat in the Caribbean. But beyond that, which is what my son's life goal is, but I wouldn't be able to not want to show up at a community theater somewhere and volunteer. Like this morning, I was in a meeting with the board of directors for the Oklahoma Community Theater Association, and I got very excited because we're planning the Oklahoma Youth Theater Conference. And here's a whole group of 8th grade through 12th grade kids who were going to get a chance to put in rooms with artists and professionals and inspired theater people. And I would get up and do that on Saturday morning anyway. I probably have fewer hobbies and watch less TV, and I know I catch fewer fish than my son does.
He's got more time. So in that aspect, you've been doing all of this for 3 decades. Do you ever feel burned out?
All the time. I tell my students, because they need to hear this too. Part of the schedule we keep in our theater department here is exhausting. My students show up not only for their classes, and most of them have jobs, and most of them have other campus service activities they do, and then they come to rehearsal anywhere between 12 and 20 hours a week, depending on what week of the production we're in. And I said, first thing you got to know is that there's a lot of hustle in working in theater and getting to the place where you want to be in theater. And there's a lot of times in your life where theater is going to have to be the thing you do for free until you do it for money. And I said, I want you to know, almost every night I dread going to rehearsal, right? There's something that's going on at home. There's something that a friend had, right? I still am the person who has to say, I would love to do that, but I can't show up. And then I remind them, but I've never, ever walked into a rehearsal where by the end of the rehearsal, I regretted going to rehearsal that night.
Yeah.
And do I still miss the fact that I didn't see that baseball game or that I missed that wedding? There's a great story. I was in grad school. My very best friend in the whole entire world had moved out to move in my apartment with me in El Paso. And she was kind of bopping around figuring about what she was going to do in her life. And we were working on a couple of shows together. And we were working on one of the new play festivals that Michael was putting on. And I was a stage manager for one of the shows, and I was directing one of the shows that were in it, and we had a tech weekend coming up, and we had a friend come up and show us that if we could scrap together $400 a piece, we could go to Hawaii for 5 days over that weekend. That something had, and I don't even remember all of the circumstances. I just remember that between flight and hotel and everything that had been booked, she and I figured we could come up with the money. We could go to Hawaii. And I remember sitting with her thinking, yeah, but we wouldn't be at Michael's Tech. And we thought about, this is a little new play festival out in the middle of El Paso with nobody there's no critics who are going to show up. We aren't getting paid for we did not go to Hawaii. There's something about the honoring the process. And anybody who doesn't understand that when you hire a theater kid, no matter what job you hire a theater kid for, you're hiring somebody who has learned to be accountable to another group of people, to care about something being deadline driven, to care about something being on a budget, to care about being accountable to an audience for the quality of something you're going to produce, and that you personally are going to be responsible even if your boss isn't standing in the room for it. It's why people love to hire theater kids for everything. But yeah, that feeling of, yeah, you get tired. You wonder, when are we going to have the letdown? You wonder, and sometimes you have to balance it. Sometimes you have to say, we need to do a show that is less, like after the term we did Lear, we did a 5-act King Lear here. We needed a play that was sweet and light and simple. And you start to figure out how you balance life. But that's also a theater skill. How do you stay going? How do you not leave everything in a rehearsal when you know you need something for the next night? How do you plan to get through several weeks of production? And you learn self-care, and you learn time management, and you learn prioritizing the big stuff. And that's all part of a theater education.
Very good. So you spent, again, 20 years as an educator, but you sit on, as you talked just a minute ago, the board of the Oklahoma Community Theater Association. So what is your vision for community theater in Oklahoma?
Boy, that's complex. There are different mission goals between for-profit theater and nonprofit theater. There are different mission goals between academic theater and community theater. We talked about earlier, there are different mission goals between being a little theater and being a nonprofit theater that has a different mission in your community. One of the reasons that I have gotten involved more directly with the Oklahoma Community Theater Association is because I set something down last year. For the previous 10 years, I'd been the executive director of the Performing Arts series on our campus. And when I started being the ED of that series, I stopped being on boards for theaters in Oklahoma City, and I gave up a lot of my other service activities because it takes a lot of time to truly be an executive director that makes a performing arts series work well. And we don't have a full-time position that does that on our campus. It is a service position. But when I set that down, again, as part of that, when it's time to shift projects and do self-care.
That's right.
One of the things I realized is that we are on this cusp in the state of Oklahoma where there's some things changing about high school graduation standards. For example, fine arts requirements are not going to be required to graduate from high schools in Oklahoma as a mandate. There are some things changing about the way funding is going to happen for training programs in theater. And having worked with so many community theaters in central Pennsylvania, in El Paso, in upstate New York, in Philadelphia, in Corinth, Mississippi, I realized that whatever is going on a higher political level, the grassroots organizations that create those experiences and that carry the weight of the work that theater does are the ones that sustain communities, whether it's creating arts programs for kids in Alcorn County who aren't getting them in their schools, whether it's supplementing Oklahoma schools that don't have theater programs in their high school, whether it's creating an opportunity for people even on the Western Main Line in Philadelphia who can't afford the time or the money to drive downtown Philly and spend $100 on a seat in a theater, but can get a $5 seat and go in and see something amazing happening with the Barnstormers. We're moving into an era where I feel like Oklahoma needs its grassroots performing arts organizations in all of the ways that applied theater can serve a state. We need them to have the back of educational theater and what theater does to keep students healthy and happy and connected. We need it to have the back of civic groups, other nonprofits who need theater people skills to keep their missions going, whether it's your church or whether it's your community festival or whether it's your local radio program. The skills of theater people are going to be needed in communities to keep other nonprofits healthy and active. We are at a time right now where we are increasingly politically agitated and divided, and theater teaches people to communicate and to collaborate and to empathize and to find common ground. And being able to teach people theater skills in their community theaters that they can use as tools when they need to be in other platforms making change and having conversations, I would feel so much more comfortable knowing I'm in a community where people have learned how to negotiate conflict because they learned it in their rehearsal and they have a set of tools that they can now apply somewhere else than to just be people who fight and polarize.
Mm-hmm.
And then on a higher education level, there's an increased emphasis on wondering what it is that the arts and humanities do in the workforce. And I've been in 30 years of studies everywhere from the Mississippi Arts Council to the Oklahoma Arts Council. And arts in a community affect quality of life. They affect economies. They affect not just communication socially, they affect civic communication and how city councils work. And we're in an era right now where people seeing that the arts mean business. Arts attract business. Think about that little theater in Mississippi that grew when the economy grew and that sustained until the economy could grow again. And the people who moved back to Corinth when the new factories opened moved back there in part because there was a community theater where their kids could be involved and where their family knew stuff was right. That there is something about sustaining a way of life that when we lose other places that make us feel safe in that, people go back to their little arts organizations. And I felt like right now was a time when Oklahoma Community Theater Association is a nonprofit whose mission is to support all of the community theater activity in the state. And so as a place where every community theater that knows their mission and their needs of their community can come in and collaborate and get support and network and get resources, that seemed like a place where maybe I could do some good.
That's so good. That's so good. So, looking to the future, where do you want to take UCO?
USAO.
Or USAO. Where do you want to take the theater program in the next 5 to 10 years?
My students will tell me. It's the same way I said, if I walk into a class and it's based on anything other than real life, what's going on right now, what's needed right now, I'm not going to really be serving my students. My students are changing constantly. What they need, the world they have to live in, how they plan to use their degree when they graduate, how their time is valuable, how they understand the role of theater in their lives. So every year I get between 10 and 15 freshmen when I'm lucky. And I hope they find the thing that is their passion. So not all of them stay theater majors. Some of them came to college because that was the thing they liked first. But the students who are in the major, I listen to them every day. I listen to them in class and I listen to them in my office. And in the same way that I figure out what class needs to be offered based on what they want, I think about the way the program is working for them, how it's working for their finances, how it's working for their future goals, how it's working for their plan. So many of them who want to stay in Oklahoma but don't quite know where they're going to fit into this bigger plan. And there's not a magic about higher education. I can't magically put you in a program and turn you out and have you have something that says, and then here is your job and you go do it.
Right.
But what I learned, and what I still think is true, is you can have a toolkit that lets you adapt to whatever the environment is when you get in it. And you can have in that toolkit the skills and the communication skills in particular to stay connected to the people who you know who can help you out at the next step. And like picking up the phone and getting a phone call from my undergraduate communication professor saying, "What are you doing?" Part of my vision is that I stay enough connected to the world these kids are living in, that I've got good resources and good advice and good support for them, and I stay connected to the world that they're experiencing right here on this campus, that my classes adapt to their needs carefully and consistently. And yeah, I hope a whole new group of kids who doesn't know what happens next come in and leave feeling like whatever that is, they're ready for it.
That's awesome. I have to say, hands down, that's probably the best thing I've heard today. Just because we can be teachers of whatever profession. There's no guarantee that whoever's under us is going to be in that profession, just like you said. But
I can't even tell them what those jobs are going to be in 5 years.
True.
Right?
But if we can equip them to be successful wherever they're at, to have that ability to adapt, to have that ability to communicate, then it's a success.
And that's my workforce story that I tell, is I don't tell you a story about here is the film and theater workforce needs of Oklahoma and here's how our students are filling them. I certainly don't tell you a story about somewhere out there in the United States is some theater that they're going to get hired at and I hope they get there. But I can tell you that for 20 years, my graduates leave this school with a degree and they go to work. And they go to work happily in sustained ways. And one of them just published his first book of short stories. And one of them loves teaching high school at Santa Fe. And one of them moved to California and made music videos for a while. And one of them she went to grad school for stage management, decided she already knew everything they were teaching her, switched over and was hired as the development director for a major theater in Indiana. Then she switched over and worked in development in some other capacity for a children's theater in Indiana. Then she decided that what she had learned in finance was enough. She has now shifted to opening her own. I don't know whether she's doing it on her own, whether she's working for a bigger company, but she is now a high-level financial advisor and just got married. And her theater degree carried her to be somebody who is making more money this year than I've made in the last 10 years. And, right, I couldn't tell her that's where she's going to live at all.
Yeah.
But watch her use those skills that she learned as an undergraduate stage manager who was good in arts management courses and who loved theater, to skyrocket her to a place where she had the ability to keep learning, to keep adapting. Yeah, and it wasn't just random. And that's cool.
Yeah. So what do you want or hope that your graduates leave with from your program?
We're a liberal arts college, and most people don't know what that means. First thing that it means is that I'm not training you specifically, necessarily, for just one thing. I tell people sometimes, if you get a dog and you train it to go and fetch a ball and bring the ball back, what that dog can do is go and fetch a ball and bring the ball back. But if you get a dog and you start teaching it vocabulary, you're going to be able to go to a movie set, and whatever needs to be done is the trick in the scene. You're going to have a dog that is smart, and it understands the way you talk to it, and it understands the way to learn something, and it's going to be able to do a whole lot of different things. Metaphor dies there, except for at a liberal arts college, it's not just the training, it's the education, it's the teaching. So broadly at our college, what we want for all of our graduates, they leave here better at reading, better at writing, better at collaboration, better at problem solving, better at thinking critically immediately and adapting to a situation. You put that in layman's terms, that's what people used to call common sense. Right?
Yeah.
You get a degree in common sense, and most of the time that's what people use to attack higher ed. Well, we got common sense and all those book learning. No, this is the kind of book learning that teaches common sense. But you've got to be able on your own to be able to read something well enough that you don't have to trust somebody else to read it for you and tell you what it meant. You've got to be able to on your own stand up at a city council meeting and make your argument and not trust somebody else to have to stand and be your advocate for you. So the first bottom level of what we're doing everywhere in every classroom is making sure we are keeping students actively interested in learning to be people who understand how to learn and how to teach themselves and how to adapt to whatever situation they're in and how to analyze what's given to them and what to do with it. theater is a great major because we are interdisciplinary in that way anyway, right? That every production has its own set of problems to solve. So when my students graduate, I do hope if you were a theater major, you've got some basic vocabulary and some fundamental technical skills that if you want to walk in at any theater anywhere, you understand what they're talking about, you understand what skills are needed, you know how to be safe, you know how to get involved. But beyond that, I hope my students leave with a skill set that they can use on their feet all of the time in the ways that they're curious, in the ways that they find their life needs, in the ways that they find they have to adapt to something they didn't expect to change, in a way that makes them brave to pick up and go somewhere else, and in a way that makes them content, even if they thought they were only coming somewhere for a year, to realize when they're in a place where what they can do is meaningful and how to go deep into that. Yeah, that I hope we're preparing them for a life. And at the center of that, I hope the fact that they like being part of a theater program encourages them to stay in an environment where they get to practice that for a while before they have to go out into the world and do it for real.
Okay. So thinking about Katie, what's something you haven't done yet that you really want to do?
I don't know what it's going to be like to be the mother of an adult son. I don't know what it's going to be like to help my son choose his college and his major, and he doesn't know where or what that is yet. I don't know what next production is most needed for our department or for the world. I do have something planned that I haven't done yet here that I'm very excited about. In 20 years of being here, I've never repeated any show that I've done. And that's going to be different next fall because I'm going to go back in the fall of 2026 and redo the show I did in the fall of 2006 when I first got here. And we're going to do it one weekend with the kids who are in this program. And we're going to do it one weekend on Alumni Weekend with any of my students of the last 20 or 30 years, even the ones from Juniata, if they want to come back and redo the first show and celebrate that 20-year anniversary with me. We're going to look back and congratulate ourselves on 20 years of really different, interesting stuff. But for next fall, we're all going to be involved in The Man Who Came to Dinner. And that's as far out as I know anything for sure.
I've heard conversations about that, so.
Hmm.
Okay, so as we wrap up our time together, I like to end every interview with what we call our curtain ball curveballs, or our curtain call curveballs.
Great.
Just some off the wall questions, and for the most part, just the first thing that pops into your head.
Great. I'm
May
for
or
it.
may not be about theater. We'll see.
Okay.
Okay, first one. If you could have dinner with any playwright, living or dead, who would it be?
The first person whose name popped in my head was Michael Wright. Talking about him today has made me miss him. He wrote a play while I was in grad school called Shooting Stars, and he let me star in the premiere production of it. I'd like to see him again. He's getting older, and one of the things I've learned in the last 10 years is that I don't spend enough time with the people who have been the most important people along the way. So, yeah, I'll have dinner with Michael. Maybe I'll call him this afternoon.
We'll see. I see that coming. Coffee or tea? How do you take it?
Coffee first thing in the morning with a lot of cream and stevia in it. Tea anytime I get to be at home on my couch with my dogs in my lap. Earl Grey. Hot.
Absolutely. If you weren't in theater, oh, this is a huge question for you. If you weren't in theater, what would you be doing?
I would either be doing what I thought I was going to do when I was 9, which is I was going to become a doctor, and then I was going to become a lawyer, and I was going to become a doctor who could prosecute anybody else I needed to for medical malpractice. That was my 9-year-old vision. I was a very strange 9-year-old. Either that or it would be the thing I wanted to be in high school, which is once I started doing Olympics of the Mind, I wanted to do creative problem solving broadly as a definition as my career forever, which is part of why I was so excited when I figured out theater was a major.
There you go. That's kind of what we do. Musicals or straight plays, be honest.
Both. They're completely different. They do different things. In the same way that I can't say, do you only ever do plays that were written before this time period or plays in this time period? I am better at directing plays without music because I am not a music director, and I am not so well versed in teaching vocal performance. I rely on a team much more in doing a musical, which is why I insist to myself that I do them periodically, because it is humbling to not be the person who knows the most in a rehearsal and to know for sure that's true sometimes.
Okay. This is a question that has actually come up at our rehearsals, and we just had dinner together, and this question kind of went around the table, and I'm going to reword it just a little bit, but what's a play that everyone loves that you are not necessarily so fond of?
I think I'm over the Glass Menagerie.
Okay.
There's a set of general understanding about people and circumstances that I think have just further and further moved away from me being able to want to tell that story. I also told my students I've never seen a good production of it, right? That there's something about it that I think to do it right, it has to almost be a museum piece. So I'm kind of sick of the Glass Menagerie. I'm also tired of all of the shows that people do over and over and over just to repeat the way they saw them done somewhere else. But that's not the fault of the plays. That's the fault of what Peter Brook called the deadly theater, which is sometimes we forget that we're supposed to be solving a creative problem and doing something new, and we're just back in to repeat it the way we saw it because we liked the way that high school did it. So, yeah, you could take the Glass Menagerie out of the rotation and I wouldn't cry for it.
Okay. So finish this sentence. Theater would be better if...
Everybody had a living wage and health care and had a support network and was safe, and they didn't have to carry the things that are hard outside in the world right up to the rehearsal door every night. I watch kids where the reason they love theater is because they get to stop carrying those burdens for a couple of hours, and I hate the fact that they have to walk back out of that door and pick them back up. I want, if we could somehow reach a point where everybody was all right and they knew they were all right, our joy in taking some time off from life and producing the reflection of life, I think, would be much higher.
Wow. That's therapeutic right there. If you could give your 25-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
She would not care what this old 50-year-old woman had to say at all. She's busy trying to figure out how she gets her next job.
She was way too busy to care, yeah.
I'd probably tell her the same thing Ken Marini did. Go back to school. As much as people worry about the cost, as much as people worry about the time and are you getting a return on investment, the best thing I ever did at any point, formally or informally, was go back to school, because suddenly there were so many choices on the other side. I wish there was a way to teach everybody that what you buy when you buy a college diploma is choices. Choices about what you're going to do next. Choices about what job you're allowed to apply for. Choices about what you get to do with your free time, because you don't have to have 3 jobs. And I've been there. And I went back to school. And I did have student loan debt, and I did pay it off. But it's the best choice I ever made. So yeah, I would say, yeah, go back to school.
Very nice.
I still think about going back to school.
Why not?
Oh, I'm going to wait till my son is out of college.
Well, that would, yeah.
I didn't want to, again, talk about the 13 things I'm doing. I want to be at a place where going back to school takes effort and time, right? But when my son's not in school, when I'm not paying for him to be in school, right, that I still kind of think about that law degree, right?
Okay.
And only because the compliment that I don't have to how much I care about the way theater can change communities is my depth of understanding of the legal realities of communities and how those things have to change. I don't have that knowledge. I wouldn't go back to get a law degree to be a lawyer. I'd go back to get a law degree to make my theater for social change better theater, more applicable theater. Plus, I was told the man who taught me theater at Ole Miss, one of them, was Scott McCoy. Scott McCoy had an MFA as a director and a JD, and he said it's because all good lawyers need to have a theater degree to fall back on.
Nice. That's pretty good. So that's pretty much all we've got for today.
We've kind of been through it, though, haven't we? We've gone here and there.
I was just fixing to congratulate all of the listeners for having earned a college degree in the last hour and a half. So this has been wonderful.
Do you know what we didn't talk about at all?
What's that?
Theater. We didn't talk about a play or a rehearsal or a theory, right?
And sometimes that's okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's really good. Katie, thank you. I can honestly see why, for the people that I've talked to, why you are so important to them and the impact that you make on students and theater in general.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you for what you do. Thank you for the lives you touch. Please continue to do what you do for this art, but more importantly for the future of our society. Thank you.
It's my privilege. Thank you so much.
For everybody else listening at home, if you are or have a theater kid, definitely make sure that USAO is on your list to visit and check out and have a conversation with Katie about the future. I think it's definitely one of the top options that you've got for looking at the future. And again, not just as a theater major, but definitely something to help you move forward. We want to thank all of you for taking a little time out of your day to listen to what we have to offer, whether it's your drive or just your evening around home or maybe while you're at work. Thank you for giving your time to us to talk about theater. We appreciate all that you do to us for your support and everything, no matter what you do, continue to support the arts.